My father laughed until tears streamed down his face when I pulled up to his country club in my beat-up Honda Civic. He made such a scene that the valet parking attendant actually apologized to him for my embarrassment. But exactly 1 week later, when I parked a $250,000 Lamborghini in his precious driveway, his laughter died in his throat. And so did every lie he'd ever told me about money, success, and what I was capable of achieving. But the car was just the beginning of what I was about to show him, because what my father didn't know was that while he was busy humiliating me in front of his entire social circle, I had been building something that would make his corporate salary look like pocket change. And when the truth finally came out, it wouldn't just change our family dynamic forever, it would prove that sometimes the people who doubt you most are actually preparing you for your greatest success. To understand why my father's reaction to that Lamborghini was so priceless, you need to know about the golden child, the family disappointment, and the lie that shaped our entire relationship. My name is Alex, and I'm 26 years old. For as long as I can remember, I've been the black sheep of the family. My older brother Marcus, he's the golden child. MBA from an Ivy League school, executive position at my father's company, brand new BMW, luxury apartment downtown. Everything my father, Richard, dreamed of in a son. Me? I was disappointed. The one who couldn't measure up. The one driving a beat-up Honda Civic with 200,000 miles on it, working multiple jobs just to afford my tiny studio apartment. While Marcus got his college tuition paid in full, my father refused to help me with a single semester. "You need to learn the value of hard work," he'd say. "Maybe then you'll understand what real success looks like." But here's what my family never understood. While they saw me as lazy and unmotivated, I was actually working 18-hour days, not at some dead-end job like they assumed, but on something they couldn't even comprehend. You see, while Marcus was learning corporate politics and climbing someone else's ladder, I was teaching myself programming, studying market trends, and building something revolutionary. My father, Richard, is a corporate VP. He's obsessed with image, with status symbols, with proving to his country club friends that he's successful. My mother, Patricia, goes right along with it. She's more concerned about what the neighbors think than about her own children's happiness. And Marcus? He's so comfortable in his position as the favorite that he never questioned whether maybe, just maybe, his younger sibling might have something valuable to offer. The family dynamics were toxic, but predictable. Every family dinner was a performance where Marcus's achievements were celebrated and my struggles were either mocked or ignored. Every social gathering was another opportunity for my father to compare us publicly. "Look at Marcus here. That's what happens when you apply yourself. Now Alex here," and then would come the lectures about responsibility and realistic expectations. But what they didn't know was that those late nights they thought I was wasting, I was coding. Those mysterious phone calls they assumed were from friends, they were actually from potential investors. Those questions I asked about business and investments, I wasn't daydreaming. I was researching. Because while my family was busy writing me off as a failure, I was quietly building something that would change everything. The final straw came at my cousin's wedding, when my father decided to make my failures the entertainment for his entire social circle. It was a beautiful venue, the kind of place where valet parking is standard and everyone arrives in luxury cars. I pulled up in my Honda, the same car I'd been driving for 5 years, the one with the dent in the door and the rattling exhaust. The valet looked uncomfortable taking my keys, especially with a line of Mercedes and BMWs behind me. But instead of being discreet about it, my father saw an opportunity. As I walked into the reception, I heard him calling out to his friends, "Everyone, come see this. This is what happens when you don't listen to your father about success." He actually gathered a crowd, made a whole spectacle of pointing to my car through the window. 26 years old and still driving that piece of junk, he announced, loud enough for half the wedding to hear. "This is my younger son, Alex. Perfect example of what not to do with your life." The laughter was brutal. These weren't strangers. These were family friends, business associates, people I'd known since childhood, and they were all laughing at me, encouraged by my own father. He went on for 10 minutes, comparing me to Marcus, joking about my apartment, my jobs, my general direction in life. "At least Marcus here understands what it takes to succeed," he said, putting his arm around my brother. "MBA, executive position, already making 6 figures at 28. Now that's the American dream." I stood there, humiliated, while my entire extended family watched my father destroy what little dignity I had left. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part came later that night, when I heard a conversation I was never supposed to hear. My father was talking to his business partner, bragging about how he'd protected his reputation by making sure I couldn't embarrass him professionally. That's when I learned the truth. My father hadn't just been unsupportive, he'd been actively sabotaging me. For years. Those job interviews that went nowhere despite my qualifications, he'd called ahead to warn them I was unreliable. Those business loan applications that got rejected without an explanation, he'd used his connections to flag my credit as risky. Those networking opportunities that dried up, he'd spread rumors about my character and work ethic throughout his entire professional circle. My own father had been systematically destroying my chances at traditional success, then mocking me for failing to achieve it. And my mother knew. Marcus knew. They all knew, and none of them said a word. But here's what none of them knew. While my father was sabotaging my conventional career path, I had been building something completely outside his world, something he couldn't touch, couldn't control, and couldn't understand. That night, humiliated and betrayed, I made a decision. My father wanted to make my failure a public spectacle? Fine. Then my success would be a public spectacle too. As I drove home in my beat-up Honda, I called my business partner, Jordan. "It's time," I said. "Launch everything. I don't care if we're not 100% ready. We're doing this now." Because what my father didn't realize was that his golden boy Marcus, with his MBA and executive position, was making $120,000 a year. Respectable, sure, but the software I'd been developing was about to be valued at $50 million, and I owned 60% of it. What my father didn't know was that while he was sabotaging my traditional career path, I had been building something that would make his corporate success look like pocket change. For 2 years, I'd been working in complete secrecy. My lazy days were actually spent in my makeshift home office, developing revolutionary project management software that could solve problems the corporate world didn't even know it had yet. While Marcus was climbing the corporate ladder, I was creating an entirely new ladder. My business partner, Jordan, is a tech genius, the kind of programmer who sees solutions where others see impossible problems. We'd met online in a coding forum, and when I explained my vision for streamlining enterprise project management, he immediately understood what we could build together. But building it was only half the battle. The other half was doing it under my family's radar, while my father actively worked against me. The sabotage was getting more sophisticated. My father had convinced 3 different landlords to flag me as a potentially problematic tenant. He'd spoken to bank managers at every major institution in the city, warning me that I was financially irresponsible. He even hired a private investigator to monitor my activities, convinced I was hiding some kind of shameful secret. If only he knew the secret was my impending success. The complications were mounting daily. Major corporations were starting to notice that someone was developing software that could revolutionize their industry, and they were trying to figure out who. Patent lawyers were circling, attempting to find loopholes in our intellectual property protection. Rival investment firms were making aggressive offers to buy us out before we could launch. Meanwhile, I was surviving on ramen noodles and coffee, pouring every dollar I earned from my part-time jobs into product development. The stress was incredible, I was working 18-hour days while maintaining the illusion that I was just another underachieving millennial. There were close calls. My mother showed up at my apartment unannounced one day while I was in a video conference with Silicon Valley investors. I had to pretend they were friends from college while trying to negotiate a $50 million funding round. Another time, my father's private investigator followed me to a meeting with venture capitalists. I had to enter through the building's back entrance and take the freight elevator to avoid detection. The timeline pressure was enormous. We had a narrow window where our software would be revolutionary rather than just competitive. Every day we delayed launch was a day our advantages diminished, but rushing to market with an imperfect product could destroy everything we'd built. Jordan was getting nervous about the secrecy. "Why don't you just tell your family?" he'd ask. "Show them what we're building. Maybe they'd be proud." But I knew better. My father's ego couldn't handle being wrong about me. If he discovered what I was doing before I was ready to control the narrative, he'd find a way to sabotage it or claim credit for it. The element of surprise was our greatest weapon. So I maintained the facade, kept driving the Honda Civic, kept living in the tiny apartment, kept letting them think I was failing while I was actually building an empire. The hardest part was the isolation. I couldn't share my excitement about investor meetings, breakthrough developments, or growing industry recognition. When we secured our first major corporate client, I had to celebrate alone in my apartment while pretending to my family that I was still searching for direction. But every moment of isolation, every sleepless night, every dollar stretched to its limit was building toward one perfect moment of revelation. And that moment was coming sooner than anyone expected. While my father was planning my public failure, I was orchestrating the most spectacular business launch our industry had ever seen, and timing it perfectly for maximum family impact. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. My father's company hosted an annual charity gala every year, the biggest social and professional event on his calendar. It was where he displayed his success, networked with industry leaders, and basked in the admiration of his peers. Everyone who mattered in his world would be there. That's where I would make my entrance. But first, I had to ensure the success was undeniable. Over the next 6 months, everything had to align perfectly. Jordan and I finalized our software just as the market was desperate for exactly what we'd created. The timing was perfect. Major corporations were struggling with project management inefficiencies that were costing them millions, and our solution was exactly what they needed. We secured $50 million in Series A funding from 3 top-tier venture capital firms. Not the kind of money you can fake or exaggerate. This was documented, public, real wealth that put me in a completely different category than anyone in my family had ever imagined. But money was just the foundation. I needed visible, undeniable symbols of success that would shock my family into understanding how completely they'd misjudged me. The Lamborghini was the obvious choice. Not subtle, not practical, but absolutely impossible to dismiss or downplay. A $250,000 car sends a message that's understood universally, especially at a country club where status symbols are carefully cataloged and compared. I also invested in a complete image transformation, custom suits, expensive watch, the kind of grooming and styling that suggests serious wealth. If I was going to make an entrance, every detail had to support the narrative that I'd moved into an entirely different social and economic class. The media strategy was crucial. I arranged for the product launch to coincide with my father's charity gala. Business journalists would be covering both events, the charity fundraiser and the revolutionary new software hitting the market. The story would write itself. Local entrepreneurs' overnight success, family dynamics, David versus Goliath narrative. But the most important element was making sure my father had no warning. I monitored his communications, tracked his calendar, even had Jordan hack into his email to ensure he had no advance knowledge of what was coming. The shock had to be complete. I spent weeks perfecting my entrance timing. Arrive fashionably late enough to make an impact, but early enough to ensure maximum time for the revelation to unfold. Pull up to the valet at the exact moment when the most people would be arriving. Step out of the Lamborghini with confidence that comes from genuine success, not borrowed confidence. The psychological aspect was just as important as the practical elements. I studied my father's patterns, his insecurities, his need to be seen as the most successful person in any room. The charity gala was his territory, his moment to shine. Disrupting that in such a dramatic way would create maximum emotional impact. I also prepared for his potential responses: denial, attempts to minimize my success, claims that he'd always believed in me. I had answers ready for every possible deflection. This wasn't just about showing up with a nice car. This was about definitively proving that every assumption they had made about me was wrong. The night before the gala, I had everything in place. The car detailed and ready, my outfit perfect, my confidence unshakable. Jordan and I did a final run-through of our product demonstration, making sure we could seamlessly transition from personal revelation to professional validation.
"Are you sure about this?" Jordan asked. "Once you do this, there's no going back. Your relationship with your family will never be the same." I looked at him and smiled. Good. It was never healthy to begin with. The next evening, as I drove to the country club in my Lamborghini, I felt a calm I hadn't experienced in years. No more hiding, no more pretending to be less than I was. No more allowing others to define my worth. Tonight, everything would change. The night of my father's charity gala, I pulled up to the country club valet in that Lamborghini, and every assumption my family had ever made about me was about to be destroyed in the most public way possible. The valet's face was the first sign that things were different. This was the same guy who'd reluctantly taken my Honda Civic keys just a week earlier, the one who'd apologized to my father for my embarrassment. Now he was practically tripping over himself to park my car in the most visible spot. I stepped out wearing a custom Italian suit that cost more than my father's monthly salary, and the transformation was immediately obvious to everyone watching. This wasn't the same defeated kid they'd been laughing at. This was someone who belonged in their world, and might even be above it. My father spotted me from across the entrance hall, and I watched his face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and growing alarm. He rushed over, with my mother and Marcus close behind. "Alex, where did you get that car?" he stammered, looking around to see who else had noticed. "I bought it," I said simply. "Paid cash." "That's impossible," Marcus interjected. "That's a $250,000 car. Actually, $247,000 after options, but who's counting?" Before my father could respond, a business journalist from the local paper approached us. She'd been covering the charity event, but now she was obviously more interested in something else. "Excuse me, are you Alex Chen, the CEO of Innovate PM?" My family's faces went blank. They'd never heard the name of the company that was about to make me famous. "I am," I confirmed. "Congratulations on the Series A funding. $50 million is incredible for a first-time entrepreneur. And I hear you're launching publicly tonight." The color drained from my father's face as he began to understand what was happening. "We are," I said, pulling out my phone. "Jordan, are we ready for the demonstration?" On cue, my business partner appeared with a laptop and presentation setup. Within minutes, we had a small crowd of tech industry leaders and business executives, including several of my father's most important colleagues, watching us demonstrate software that was about to revolutionize their industry. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. CEOs were asking for implementation timelines, investors were inquiring about additional funding opportunities, and industry experts were calling it the most innovative project management solution in decades. My father stood frozen, watching his entire professional network suddenly focus on his son, the son he'd been publicly mocking for years. "Richard," called out one of his business partners, "you never mentioned Alex was developing something like this. This software could save our company millions in efficiency improvements." Another colleague approached, equally excited. "We need to implement this across all our divisions. Alex, can we schedule a meeting next week?" I watched my father's face as the reality hit him. Not only had he been completely wrong about me, but his systematic sabotage had backfired spectacularly. While he'd been trying to destroy my traditional career prospects, I'd built something entirely outside his comprehension. "Dad," I said quietly, so only our family could hear, "we need to talk." I led them to a private corner of the venue, away from the growing crowd of people who wanted to discuss business with me. "How?" was all he could manage. "The same way anyone builds a business. Vision, hard work, and execution. All those late nights you thought I was being lazy, I was coding. All those mysterious phone calls you dismissed, they were investor meetings. All those questions about business strategy you thought were naive, I was researching the market you couldn't see." My mother looked devastated. "But we just wanted you to be realistic." "Realistic," I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You wanted me to accept failure. But here's what you never understood. I wasn't failing. You were sabotaging me. I know about the job interviews you ruined, Dad. I know about the credit references you destroyed. I know about every connection you poisoned and every opportunity you blocked." Marcus stepped forward, finally finding his voice. "Alex, I had no idea." "Yes, you did." I cut him off. "You all knew. You just didn't care because it was easier to maintain your narrative than to question whether you might be wrong." My father tried to recover, shifting into damage control mode. "Son, I always believed in your potential. Maybe my methods were harsh, but I was trying to motivate you." "Stop." My voice was firm enough that he actually did. "We both know that's not true. You didn't believe in my potential. You were threatened by it. And now you're seeing exactly what that potential looks like when it's not being systematically undermined."
The confrontation was interrupted by another journalist, this one from a major business magazine. "Mr. Chen, we'd love to feature your story in our next Entrepreneur Spotlight. The David and Goliath angle, overcoming family adversity to build a successful company, would really resonate with our readers." I looked at my father, who was now visibly panicking at the idea of his sabotage becoming public knowledge. "I'll think about it," I told the journalist. Then, turning back to my family, "But right now, I have investors to talk to and a company to run." As I walked away, I heard my mother whisper to my father, "Richard, what have we done?" The question hung in the air as I rejoined the crowd of successful business leaders who now saw me as an equal, and who had no idea that just an hour ago, my own family had considered me a failure. As I watched my father's world crumble around his false assumptions about success and worth, I realized that his greatest gift to me had been showing me exactly who I never wanted to become. The immediate aftermath was swift and dramatic. Within hours of the gala, my phone was buzzing with interview requests, partnership offers, and invitations to speak at industry conferences. The business world had taken notice, and suddenly everyone wanted to know the story behind the young entrepreneur who'd seemingly appeared overnight. But the real transformation was just beginning. Over the following months, our software became the industry standard. Fortune 500 companies were implementing our system, and our user base grew from hundreds to hundreds of thousands. Within a year, the company was valued at over $500 million, making me one of the youngest tech entrepreneurs in the country. The financial success was gratifying, but it was the professional recognition that meant the most to me. I was invited to join corporate boards, speak at major conferences, and mentor other young entrepreneurs. The same industry my father had tried to lock me out of was now celebrating me as an innovator and leader. My family's reaction was complicated. My father spent weeks trying to rebuild our relationship, alternating between taking credit for teaching me resilience and apologizing for being too tough. But his apologies always came with conditions, and his pride always came with attempts to insert himself into my success story. My mother struggled with guilt.
finally understanding how her complicity had damaged our relationship. She tried to overcompensate with support that felt performative rather than genuine. Marcus, surprisingly, was the first to offer a real apology. I knew Dad was being unfair, he admitted during a private conversation, but I was too comfortable being the golden child to speak up. I'm sorry. The relationship I built with Marcus became the healthiest family connection I had. Removed from the golden child black sheep dynamic, we discovered we actually liked each other as people. But the most important changes were personal. Success gave me the freedom to build the life I actually wanted, rather than constantly defending against the life others expected me to accept. I moved into a beautiful house, not to show off, but because I could finally afford the space I'd always dreamed of. I traveled extensively, partly for business, but mostly because I'd never had the resources to explore the world. I started a foundation focused on helping other dismissed young people develop business skills and access startup capital. The work became deeply meaningful. I met countless people who'd been written off by families, teachers, or employers who couldn't see past conventional definitions of success. Helping them develop their ideas and access funding felt like turning my painful experience into something constructive. Dating became interesting in entirely new ways. Suddenly, I was meeting people who were attracted to success rather than intimidated by potential. More importantly, I learned to value partners who cared about my character over my bank account. The relationship with my parents stabilized into something functional but limited. I maintained boundaries that protected my well-being while remaining open to genuine change. Some family gatherings were pleasant. Others were reminders of old dynamics that die hard. My father never fully accepted that his judgment about me had been completely wrong, but he stopped actively undermining me. My mother gradually learned to support without trying to control. Progress was slow but real. The media attention brought unexpected opportunities. My story became a case study in business schools about non-traditional paths to entrepreneurship. I was invited to give commencement speeches about overcoming adversity and defining success on your own terms. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect was the industry impact. Our software wasn't just profitable, it was actually making work more efficient and less stressful for millions of people. The technical innovation was solving real problems in ways that improved people's daily lives.
Looking back, I realized that my father's sabotage had actually been a gift, though not the kind he intended. By blocking my access to traditional career paths, he forced me to develop innovative thinking and self-reliance. By doubting my capabilities, he motivated me to prove my worth in undeniable ways. By trying to control my narrative, he taught me the importance of defining my own story. The family dynamics that had once seemed permanently toxic gradually evolved into something healthier, though different from what any of us had originally expected. We learned to relate as adults with separate lives, rather than as characters playing predetermined roles in a family drama. Today, the company employs over 1,000 people and continues growing internationally. I'm working on my second startup, focused on educational technology. The foundation has helped launch over 200 small businesses started by people who'd been dismissed by others. My father still drives his practical sedan to work every day, while I alternate between the Lamborghini and several other cars depending on my mood. But the real difference isn't in our vehicles. It's in our understanding of what success actually means. He measures success by meeting other people's expectations and maintaining social status. I measure success by solving meaningful problems and helping others achieve their potential. The Honda Civic? I kept it. It sits in my garage next to the luxury cars, a reminder of where I came from and what's possible when you refuse to accept other people's limitations on your life. Sometimes the people who doubt you most are preparing you for your greatest success. They're teaching you resilience, motivation, and the determination to prove that conventional wisdom isn't always wise. My father laughed when he saw me drive that used car, but I had the last laugh when I showed him that success isn't about meeting his expectations. It's about exceeding your own. If you enjoyed this story of overcoming family adversity to achieve success, make sure to subscribe for more inspiring entrepreneur journeys. And let me know in the comments, have you ever been underestimated by people who later had to eat their words? Share your story below. Your experience might be the encouragement someone else needs to keep pushing toward their goals.